This video is titled Hemp Economics Outlook for 2022. I'm Aaron Smith, an Associate Professor and Extension Economist in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics. In this video, we will talk about recent data released by the USDA regarding hemp acreage, yields, price, crop insurance, contracts, and have a few takeaways regarding the hemp industry in Tennessee and moving forward, what we are potentially facing in terms of basic economics. There still remains a tremendous amount of challenges and uncertainty with hemp. And one of the takeaways from this presentation, hopefully you'll be able to get, is the variability in some of the data that's available and the different production methods, yields, and prices that are faced by hemp producers across the United States and specifically in Tennessee. So when we look at the USDA, there's a couple of different data sources we want to talk about for hemp. The first one that I'm going to discuss is the USDA FSA hemp planted acreage data. This is data that is reported to the local FSA offices by producers, and they do end up breaking it into different categories. Some of these categories have been modified over time, so it is challenging to kind of piece together where some of these would end up falling in previous categories. But the main categories that are out there: seed, grain, processed, oil, CBD, fiber, and sets are available through the FSA website. I can pull them down for each year. They started reporting this in 2015 up to 2021. And so just a couple of basic industry trends to start out with. Obviously, we've seen an explosion of hemp in 2018, or starting in 2018 with the new farm bill that led to a substantial amount of acreage in 2019. And due to some of the market forces that many producers experienced, we've seen a tremendous amount of pullback. And a lot of that was a result of an inability to get that hemp processed and to end up getting the sales that some thought were going to be available in this market. And so since 2019, when we peaked based on FSA data at 146,000 acres, we've seen a decline in the amount of acreage across the U.S., 69,000 in 2022 and 35,000 in 2021. Well, there's a couple of quick things I just want to point out about FSA data. Since this is producer declared, this should be considered kind of, I guess, a minimum basis. There will be some acreage that was planted that might not be reported by FSA. And so again, this is just one data source. And again, there's some variability in the data as we step through this presentation. So we look at different places that we've ended up seeing different types of hemp production produced. This is a 2021 map of where that acreage was located. And so again, you can see a dispersion across numerous states. This is for CBD acreage. And when we look at this, we go from 1 to 5 acres all the way up to a maximum of 4,569 acres. And you can see when we look in Tennessee, we do have a hemp presence across the entire state, but we do end up seeing pockets where there's concentrations north of Nashville and in the central portion of the state, in addition to out west and on the border with Kentucky. When we end up looking at hemp for fiber, again, this is one where there's substantially less acreage that's out there, but we do have a few counties with some hemp acres in Tennessee that are being reported to FSA. We look at grain, again, a very small footprint in Tennessee, where most of the hemp for grain is produced in Montana, the Dakotas, and Minnesota. When we look at seed hemp, again, very similar to the grain hemp, where we do end up seeing it mostly in Montana and North Dakota and Minnesota. When we look at USDA, this is industrial hemp grown in the open area and planted and harvested. And this gives kind of an indication of where we've been in at the state level. And so again, this is USDA NASS data. So again, we're changing data sources here, and that's why there is some that's maybe a little bit different than what was shown in the FSA. And so in 2021, according to NASS, we ended up having 54,000 acres planted, with 33,480 of that harvested. In terms of Tennessee, you can see there's some other states that have substantially more planted acres, but what was reported by NASS in their hemp report was 650 acres planted and 435 acres harvested in Tennessee. When we look at how USDA, they had a national hemp report. This is the first one that they ever released in 2021. And there are some challenges with the data, and a lot of it is due to the variability which is somewhat to be expected, because we are very young or very immature in this industry, and it's a high degree of variability based on different production methods, different intended uses, and different markets that it's being produced for. So again, they break it into these different regions, and look at different states. But when we look at the average yield per open area, the average was 1,235 pounds per acre, but a tremendous range of 120 to 2,520 pounds per acre. We look at grain, 530 pounds per acre with a range of 271 to 3,000 pounds. When we're talking fiber, 2,620 pounds was the average, but again, a big range of 610 pounds to 6,280. And that's a state average number. That's how big of the range was when we looked at the individual states. Seed was 530. So again, just very large differences depending on which states and which production regions we see hemp production occurring. When we look at price, this is again another one that just highlights the tremendous variability and uncertainty that producers are coping with. And so we'll talk a little bit later on about the importance of trying to end up establishing a market before we look at even planting this commodity, making sure that we're doing as much as possible. You can never be 100% certain on being able to secure a price in a market, but we want to make sure that the due diligence is done in terms of establishing a deal with the processor, and also using the available risk management tools to end up help mitigating some of the risks that we face. But again, this ends up showing the price that's out there, and you can see the tremendous variation that is out there between outdoor and indoor, and then even just within the states when you're looking at the different prices that producers are facing. We'll highlight Tennessee, where you can see the difference between indoor and outdoor production. And when we look at that national average for outdoor production, $39.60 a pound. Industrial hemp prices for 2021, again, there's differences based on what we're talking about in this report. If you do want details on this number, on some of these numbers, it is in the USDA NASS industrial hemp report. If you Google that, you'll be able to pull up an in-depth or the entire report, and you can kind of work through some of the numbers and the methods that they ended up using to arrive at some of these numbers. But again, when we look at grain prices, 151 or $1.51 per pound, the range of 65 cents per pound to 15. So again, that tremendous range in terms of prices that producers are facing. Grown protection for clones and transplants, this is in dollars per plant. $1.32 was the average, with a range of 23 cents to $6.08. We look at floral hemp grown under protection, $251 per pound is the average, with a range of 32.60 to 674. So again, just highlighting the tremendous variation that producers out there. And it highlights the importance of being able to understand what the intended use is, where it's going to be sold, and the quality requirements and specifications when working with the processor, or if you're targeting the end consumer, what is it that we're actually targeting? What are the reasonable prices that we're looking at? We look at fiber prices, again, all over the map. When we look at this, there wasn't a number that was reported for Tennessee, but the national average was $1.50 a pound, but it was skewed by North Carolina. When we look at 347, a lot of that is there was a minimal amount of production that was done there, so it can be skewed by the limited sample size that we do end up having in these individual states. When we look at 2021 hemp production and value, and I want to kind of point out just kind of a couple of quick things on this. We have what the production was, but then we also have that utilized component, which again is important to consider, because when we had some of those extreme carryovers in 2019 in particular, just because we produced the crop doesn't necessarily mean that we ended up being able to end up selling it. You can see where the numbers were in terms of production, and then the overall value that was estimated in this report was $824 million for the industry. And when we look at that, 712 was the open value, and then 112 million was for the under protection. One of the tools that I think is in its infancy, but hopefully we'll be able to get some products that do a little bit better for providing protection is crop insurance. And for those that are kind of new to agriculture production or have limited experience with crop insurance, Crop insurance provides protection against declines in yield or revenue, depending on what products are available for the individual commodity, but it protects against insured causes of loss. So those that are uninsured, so it's the importance of working with a qualified crop insurance agent or making sure you're reading your underlying policy to determine what you are insured against. Now, when we're participating in crop insurance, it's not like some of the other USDA programs. This one does come at a fee. It's a premium. That is split between the producer and the government. So again, there is some of the premium for the crop insurance product is subsidized by the federal government. Now, one of the challenges that hemp producers do face is not all products are available in their individual counties or their individual locations. So again, speaking with a crop insurance agent and your FSA office is going to be the best way to end up identifying what products are available to you as a grower in individual counties. The three products that do cover hemp in some capacity is an APH product and a whole farm revenue protection product. Both of those are administered by RMA, so that would be working with your crop insurance agent to end up determining what protection and the coverage levels that would be affiliated with your individual farm. The third crop insurance product is NAP, which is actually administered by the Farm Service Agency. So you'd have to go to your local Farm Service Agency to determine what the protection is provided for your individual county. In terms of eligible causes of loss versus ineligible, there's a whole list of different causes of losses, but I did want to kind of highlight some of the more common ones. So when we're talking about an insured cause of loss that is eligible for crop insurance to receive an indemnity payment, you're talking damaging weather, insects, plant diseases, those types of things that are going to decrease production. When we're talking about ineligible, these are really important for hemp. First of all, if a contract or if a processor defaults on a contract, that's not an insurable cause of loss. That has been a challenge. We'll talk a little bit more about contracting in a bit, but in order to participate in crop insurance, you do have to have a contract with a producer or with a processor. The other one is failure to meet minimum management practices. Any negligence in terms of producing the crop will make you ineligible to receive a crop insurance indemnity. And then the other big one that's specific to hemp is if THC exceeds the approved or authorized levels. That is not an insured cause of loss. You would not be compensated for a loss under those circumstances. So when we look at utilization, when we think back to the FSA and the NAS estimates for planted acres, in 2021 we had just over 10,000 acres that were insured for a total of 7.46 million in liabilities. This is from the RMA summary of business report that you can pull for each commodity that is produced. There's 1.6 million in premiums paid and 4.29 million in indemnities payments. So that's a loss ratio of 2.68 to 1. When we look at 2020, we had 21,000 acres insured with liabilities of 27 million, with a total premium of 2.48 million and 12.37 million in indemnity payments, or a loss ratio of 3.2. Loss ratio just indicates how much was paid in premiums relative to what was paid out in indemnity. So again, for both of these years, we ended up seeing higher indemnities paid than what was collected in premium. One of the challenges for producer adoption of crop insurance, because obviously we've got substantially more acres planted than what we do insured. You know, one of the big obstacles that I mentioned earlier is that you have to have a contract with a processor to be eligible. Those can be difficult to obtain from processors, and that can limit the use of crop insurance for those that are growing hemp without a contract. The other challenge that we do run into is there's been some poor experiences with signing contracts. The quality of the contracts, particularly when we first seen the major portion of the hemp boom, left a lot to be desired and quite often provided producers little or no protection. The other major challenge that we always see in hemp production is what we call counterparty risk. And counterparty risk is simply your business risk aligns with those that you're doing business with. So if a processor goes bankrupt, you have a contract with them, the ability for you to realize on that is the counterparty risk. So if you're not able to end up having somebody fulfill that contract, that's a risk to your operation. That's very prevalent in hemp markets. Another one that's really challenging right now is the variations in cost of production and intended use by location. And so even when we are looking at the same intended use or similar intended use, we have such a wide variation in production methods and production costs. What type of protection does that crop insurance really provide to the hemp grower? And so that is one of the big challenges when you're securing yield and trying to end up figuring out, well, how much of what I've put into this crop is really protected by crop insurance. There's a massive variation there. And so that is another one that's challenging. Coverage level is something that I think all producers end up struggling with, or how much of my production should I end up covering? And again, that the only way to do that is to work some of the numbers and see where your coverage level is relative to what your cost of production estimates are. And then another one that is challenging for hemp producers, you do have to have a production history. And so that does stymie participation in crop insurance, and it can potentially reduce the cover or the amount of your production that's covered based on a lack of historical records. And then the other one too is it's not available in all counties. So there is some county level availability issues in terms of crop insurance for those that are in hemp production or interested in hemp production. Contracting is a very challenging one. For many growers, the contract might be the most important risk management tool. Again, there was some very unfortunate circumstances with contracting in 2018 through 2020, kind of left a bad taste in a lot of producers' opinions. But at the same time, a properly structured contract can provide producers with some protection that they can end up getting in terms of managing some of their risk. And a lot of that is working closely with the processor or buyer, making sure that they're viable and setting up an arrangement, a legal arrangement that does allow you to end up providing some protection that if you do have a successful crop, that the market and the price is there that's going to be able to make it a profitable endeavor for you. So, a well-developed contract allows parties to reallocate those risks. So again, it's a question of how do you end up trading off those risks with those that you're doing busy with. And I did mention, or business with that. I did mention counterparty risk. And again, there is a whole bunch of major issues there. So the big thing before signing any legal document is to make sure that you seek the proper legal advice and rely on legal counsel to guide the decisions in terms of how the contract should be structured and whether it's something that should be signed. So we're talking about, okay, well, what are we looking at in terms of considerations in contracts? Again, we could spend several videos discussing what should go in there. But one of the big ones is ownership of genetic material. The grower needs to consider if there are any IP restrictions that need to be able to take into account and understand the quality terms that are attainable in their area. So, what are the consequences if a minimum quality is not met? What is the consequences if that contract is voided because of quality concerns? You also need to understand how and when a grower will base contracts on the quality of the hemp delivered. So again, do you have payments that are held in escrow accounts to ensure payment? Do you end up looking at taking out a lien to ensure payment if a processor defaults? There's a whole slew of legal issues that do arise with signing a contract. There's an excellent webinar that was put on by the National Ag Law Center at the University of Arkansas that discusses a lot of these issues in depth. So I would encourage you to go and take a look at that because it does provide a very in-depth analysis of what hemp producers should be looking for in contracts and some of the considerations and how they can protect themselves. So just to kind of wrap up, there is still a tremendous amount of uncertainty in hemp production and on the economics of it. It gets into very individual circumstances. We're looking at potential returns because of the tremendous amount of variability, both in the cost of production, but also in the prices and in the yields that are expected with hemp production right now. And again, it's going to take some time to end up figuring out exactly what this industry does look like moving forward. So for those that are maybe a little more risk averse, that it's going to take some real strong consideration as to whether this is an industry that is going to make sense to incorporate into your operation. I am cautiously optimistic that we will see potentially some better tools available to mitigate some of these financial and production and marketing risks. I think that's a necessity if we do want to end up seeing this as a viable long-term industry. Things like crop insurance and being available to or able to participate in some of the other USDA programs, I think would do a lot in terms of helping out hemp producer, providing a little bit more stability and not being maybe subject to the market whims as we've seen so far. I do think even with all the challenges that we've ended up seeing with some of the contracts that were signed, I do think that having a contract that is written between a grower and a producer, I think is very important, but it needs to make sure that it does provide protection for the grower, in addition to the person that's looking at processing it. So again, making sure that those are reviewed by an appropriate legal specialist is imperative, just to make sure that you can get the most out of those. Again, no contract's going to be without some risk, but at the same time, we do want to make sure that we are trying to lay off some of the risk that's available. For 2022 and 2023, we're going to see kind of a same market outlook where we're going to see high or prices that are highly variable, and profitability is going to be all over the board when we look at individual circumstances. So again, making sure that we're protecting ourselves as much in terms of establishing a relationship with a processor or a buyer, and factoring in what type of prices are we looking at getting, and how can I protect myself from any adverse consequences if the processor isn't able to live up to those arrangements. With that, if you have any questions or would like some additional resources, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Thank you.